Good morning. Today is Monday, April 17th, which happens to be the day before tax day. So better get your taxes in today. Is it the last day you could do your taxes? So get your W-2s and your F-44s or whatever it is. But tomorrow is tax day. But today is Monday, April 17th, and we'll be talking about one topic in particular. I think this is a topic that a lot of us may it's a sin that a lot of us may be committing without even realizing it. However, we will be talking about the sin of gluttony this morning. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Eugene and Shinsuck. How are your allergies this week?
I don't have allergies.
You don't have a single one.
Yeah.
You're allergic to winning. Does anyone else have any allergies? Pastor Eugene, do you have any allergies? No, none whatsoever. So see, I used to not have allergies, and then as I've aged throughout the years, I've been having some allergies, and it's been pretty rough. I know a lot of people have been having those allergy things going around. So I hope you guys are doing well, doing okay. But today, irregardless.
Not a word.
It could be, though. It could be. It's not, but it could be. Very well could be.
Like goblin mode.
That is actually not even a compound word. That's just two words. But anywho, irregardless, today we'll be talking about the topic.
For all intensive purposes.
Is a word?
It's not a thing.
That's true. That's very true. Today, Pastor Eugene, we're talking about gluttony, and I thought it'd be apropos to ask, where is your favorite buffet?
Apropos.
Is a word.
Yes.
Apropos. Anyway, where's your favorite buffet?
Buffet?
Yeah, like not Warren, but I'm talking about an established restaurant where you can indulge AYCE, as they
They
say.
still have buffets around here?
I actually saw one the other day.
Okay.
It was
There's
called,
one in
it was called
Saddlebrook.
Dynasty Buffet.
Oh, wow. I haven't been to a buffet in a long time. Maybe a buffet in church, but
Church buffet.
There's one by church, POC. Isn't that a buffet technically?
It's,
or no?
Yeah. But isn't all you can eat stuff just technically a buffet? Kind
So
of.
all you can eat is a buffet? I don't think so.
I don't think they're simultaneously the similar.
Because they bring the food to your table.
True, the service is A1.
But at buffets, you have to get up to go get your food.
There's
It
a
is
place
self-serve.
called Number One Sushi that
Where's that?
I take the staff to.
Oh, yeah. I love Las Vegas sushi.
None of these are buffets though, right?
I don't know. I think AYCE counts as a buffet. So where's your favorite AYCE?
Flaming Grill.
No, you don't.
That place is the worst.
Now we're not going to get sponsored by them. This is the worst.
That's true. We could have got some free
Dysentery.
pork chops.
We're
General Soul Chicken.
Pastor Gene, do you have a favorite AYCE spot? I actually don't know that, whether you do or
No,
not.
I don't really like all you can eat stuff.
Yeah, it does get to you.
Yeah.
I do clean house,
It's
though.
age. As you get older, it's less all you can eat and more like short and sweet.
But mine is Las Vegas sushi, I think. So if anyone ever is, yeah, I love that place. But today we're talking about gluttony. And I think when we hear the word gluttony or glutton, immediately, America comes to mind, right? Buffets come to mind. Thanksgiving comes to mind. But I wanted to talk about the biblical definition of gluttony, what it is, because it does seem like the Bible is warning us against such a sin. So I want to read for us a couple Proverbs. The first one is Proverbs chapter 23, verse 2. It reads, "And put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite." Proverbs 28, verse 7 reads, "The one who keeps the law is a son with understanding, but a companion of gluttons shames his father." And Philippians 3:19 reads, "Their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with mind set on earthly things." So we see these warnings of towards gluttony or even being a friend of a glutton. So, what is the biblical definition of gluttony and why is it so dangerous?
I think that last one that you read could give us an overarching understanding of gluttony as it pertains to what the Bible is saying.
Yeah.
And so it's directing your appetite towards a sinful end. How about that? Directing your appetite toward a sinful end. And so it's not wrong to have an appetite. So a lot of people think gluttony is overeating. It can be, but not necessarily.
Okay.
Because it should be, so overeating should be under this understanding of directing your appetite toward an improper end. We could even go toward Genesis, that sin that Eve had and Adam partook in. What did that have to do with gluttony? Well, they directed their appetite toward a sinful end.
Okay.
And so they had an appetite. She saw that it was pleasing, and she desired wisdom. It looked beautiful, right? So the appetite is there, but the end was sin. So that is the sin of gluttony.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you brought up the fact that many people think of overeating. So where does that even come from then, I guess? Because it has to come from something.
Yeah. The classic understanding of gluttony does. So all these sins that we're talking about, the 7 deadly sins, is from tradition, the Roman Catholic understanding of gluttony.
Right.
And I think the reason why we want to continue to go back to the Bible, because I think it is more comprehensive and it gives us a deeper understanding to the roots of why we would even think overeating is gluttony, or it's completely equal on par with gluttony. And speaking of pars, you hit a few yesterday.
I did. A couple. I feel like 3, I think.
Oh, yesterday, Sunday. So you went during the Lord's Day.
No. We're recording. This is the first time I'm admitting this. We're recording on Friday, which means that Thursday I got a couple pars. Yes.
Yeah, the best game of his life.
Yeah, which is actually the worst game for some because my score isn't anything to brag about. But speaking of bragging, not at all. But you said that the biblical definition of gluttony is directing your appetite towards an improper end.
Sinful
end.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering because gluttony comes with the notion that it's like an overdoing of something, right? And so does any directing of your appetite towards an improper end, is that always going to be gluttony, or is it like an over directing of your appetite? Because when we think of glutton, we just think of someone eating a lot or maybe indulging in something a lot.
Yeah, food is a big part of our history. So in humanity, like humanity's history, food was a huge part. It's only in the recent days where we've become so rich that we think of food as just something. It's there. It doesn't have to be there.
Yeah.
A lot of people diet and things like that because it's so readily available.
Right.
But until the modern era, food wasn't this available. Like even eating meat was a very, very sacred thing for many religions and cultures, even in Israel's time, right?
Yeah.
So when you would eat meat, it would be significant, because it would point to a ceremony or some kind of festival. We could actually go through one of them where you're supposed to eat a lot. You're supposed to, in our day and age, we may even think of it as overindulging or overeating. But
overindulging, yeah.
In the Bible, it's just called feasting, and that is in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 26.
Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 26 reads, "And spend the money for whatever you desire, oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your appetite craves, and you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household."
Yeah, whatever your appetite craves means whatever you want to eat it in this festival. This is what we're supposed to do. These are large celebratory meals, but these are not every day, right? This is not an everyday phenomenon. This is, once every festival or feast time, you would do something like that. And so overeating or overindulging, that is gluttony. so to speak, but not all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So in this
Yeah.
case, you would technically overeat, but it wouldn't be gluttony. It wouldn't be in the sin of gluttony. And so God wouldn't consider that. So that's why I'm saying, like, in today's age, I don't think we could differentiate between the two of feasting and overeating.
I don't think so.
So even when I used to follow Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's epic cheat meals,
Yes,
he used
yes.
to post these things up on his social media, and they would be epic because you couldn't do that on your best day.
Right.
Like,
Oh, no, I could, I think.
I'm saying you as in general.
Oh, okay.
The average layperson
Yeah.
couldn't eat what he ate.
Yeah.
Like even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like a cheat meal because for 3 to 6 months he would be on this very, very
Right,
strict
right.
eating regimen. And so every once in a while he'd go back and then, you know, do this epic cheat meal, which he would post. And so in that similar notion, it is a celebration. There is something ceremonial about a celebration. And in that sense, yeah, overeating isn't always a sin. But yeah, overeating consistently would point to the definition we have, which is your appetite is being pointed toward a sinful end.
So I guess trying to separate the image that we have when we think of glutton or gluttony and overeating, would you say then the reason why gluttony is a sin, I mean, is because God says it's a sin, but also God says that it's a sin because you are ultimately seeking satisfaction from something else? Is that where this is coming from?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with that. And I think we do it now. So in 2023, we do it now subconsciously almost. So
Okay.
there are people like myself who have a tendency to eat when they're stressed.
Yeah.
And so you have like a bag of chips or a chocolate bar or whatever it is, right? Or your, latte, whatever it is. You're drinking or you're constantly feeding yourself with, because in the end, what does that do? In the end, it is gluttony in the sense that there is a deeper craving that you have. There is something that you need to complete, something that is necessary in your life. But you're filling it with food. You're filling it with snacks. You're filling it with
Sleep.
something
Yeah.
to that effect,
Yeah.
right? So that is also gluttony.
I think this is a little different than what many people, again, would have in mind. So perhaps we can continue to talk about this idea of gluttony and what it means in the Bible. Where do you see in our culture gluttony being encouraged or glorified today?
Starbucks.
How so?
That's not even a second thought to me. Starbucks has
Starbucks?
capitalized on people's, I guess, overindulging desire to be gluttonous, if that makes sense. And so there is a quote that you could read from C.S. Lewis' Screwtape Letters.
Yes.
And this is Screwtape he's explaining to his nephew Wormwood, right? These are an elder demon versus a more novice demon, a Hada demon, right? And
Yeah.
I think we talked about it before. But this is Screwtape explaining to Wormwood, his nephew, about the gluttony of this woman using her discriminating palate, using her, her very precise, I guess we would call it now just eccentricity. It's something that we kind of celebrate and we kind of lift up. But yeah, you could read that quote, please.
This is from Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. She is a positive terror to hostesses and servants. She's always turning from what has been offered her to say with a demure little sigh and a smile, "Oh, please, please. All I want is a cup of tea, weak, but not too weak, and the teeniest, weeniest bit of really crisp toast." You see, because what she wants is smaller and less costly than what has been set before her. She never recognizes as gluttony her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. At the very moment of indulging her appetite, she believes that she is practicing temperance.
So what is she a slave to? She is slave to what she wants, and that is directed by her stomach. So she has convinced herself or her stomach has convinced her, however way you want to put it, is that she wants this exact thing. So what you placed before isn't good enough. I ordered this, or I want this, and this is the exact way I want it. So now, I think Starbucks was the beginning of it all, but now almost every restaurant is expected to do exactly what you want, or exactly to the T what you ordered. So it could be. I think recently I saw this one social media post about this one young lady who has the perfect In-N-Out combo.
Oh,
And you got to get it with this. You
Yeah,
got to get
yeah,
it with
yeah.
mustard. You got to get it with this. You got to get your buns over toasted. And
Yep.
then the fries you want it in this exact way. And it's not on the menu, but they will do it for you. And the workers might hate you for it, but it's going to be the best burger you've ever tasted. And all these responses came in. This is amazing. Blah blah blah.
yeah.
That's gluttony. That's the sin of gluttony. It's getting exactly what your stomach dictates and then moving along with that. Even when we talk about overindulging, it is overindulging the appetite that you have, even if it's to the T, even if it's less than what the average person eats, that's still gluttony. And so it is directing your appetite towards a sinful end. And so that's what we mean by gluttony. And it could be eating a lot, it could be eating a little, it could be eating exactly the way you want things done, but that is still gluttony. And I think the reason why people don't think that they are guilty of the sin of gluttony is because they just think gluttony is overeating. This is false. Overeating is pointing to something. And what is that pointing to? It's pointing to overindulging your cravings.
But I'm wondering though, what you said about Starbucks or a restaurant, I know as an example, but what about preferences? Aren't we paying extra for our details and preferences? Isn't that using our money wisely? Like, when you go to a restaurant and you receive something that you don't want or in the way that you want, wouldn't you return it because you want to use your money wisely and get the best bang for your buck, as they say?
Yeah, this is why the sin of idolatry is so deceptive. It's so sneaky.
Yeah.
Because you don't know when you stepped into the zone of idolatry, but all of a sudden you're there. You know what I mean? All I wanted was a cup of coffee. I just want it black, and I want it strong. I don't want it weak. I want to get my hit of caffeine. That's all I want. So I go to a restaurant, I get a cup of coffee, and it really doesn't hit the spot. But because that's exactly what I wanted. But now it's gone to a place where it hasn't hit the spot. It makes me upset. I can't be satisfied. This craving is now in my thoughts and my mind all day long. This crappy cup of coffee.
Yeah.
All I wanted was this. And it affects not just my mood, but my spirit. It affects my temperance and all these other things. I'm mean to my coworkers, blah, blah, blah. I just wanted a cup of coffee. That's when you know you've stepped into the realm of idolatry. That's when you know your cravings and your appetites have taken over your life, and not you are no longer in control of your appetite. Your appetite is in control of you, and that's what idolatry is. So let's say I have a preference for whatever reason. It could be preference in the sense that I'm allergic. Like as an example, I'm allergic to mushrooms, and so I get this mushroom soup, and I ask for no mushrooms. Which is kind of ridiculous. I get it. And they have mushrooms in it. And you're like, I asked for no mushrooms because I'm allergic to it.
Yeah.
And then they take it back. It's like, this guy is gluttonous. Or
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessary gluttony when you are allergic to something because you literally can't eat it. But I think it can be in the sense where that craving is something that controls you. And you're like I said, the overarching view that we can have is your appetite is directed toward a sinful end. And so you're sinning with the appetite, which is exactly what Eve did. And this is what Adam was succumbed to as well. And so I do think it can be idolatrous in the sense that you have no satisfaction with what you've been given because your craving is what is controlling you.
So then it really also talks about contentment then, the sin of gluttony,
Yeah.
and how our contentment is in what God has provided. Our satisfaction is ultimately in God rather than how hot or cold our coffee is or how well cooked our steak is. But I have to say though, if I'm paying $100 for a ribeye and it comes out well done, I would rather ask them if it's okay to have it the way that I prefer. Is that wrong?
No, I don't think it's wrong to get what you pay for. I think it's wrong, like I said, when you take the next step, all of a sudden you're in it, where you are so upset. You are upset beyond what is reasonable.
Yeah.
Meaning now you are just in the sinful territory of, bitterness.
Yeah.
So people can get bitter about their food.
Yeah, it's true.
Which is a sin.
Yeah.
Bitterness is a sin. It can be even obsessing over a diet. It can be obsessing over counting calories. It can be where you are so involved with your own diet that you won't eat when others eat, and then you'll just bring your packed lunch.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anybody like that, but
Not anymore.
let's say, but let's say you don't know anybody like that anymore, but let's say everybody's having fellowship. They want to go to a diner, but you're counting calories, and every single calorie is so important to you. That you would rather eat your packed lunch in your car and then join people in that diner for, let's say, just a glass of water.
0 calories.
That would be the sin of gluttony, because you have gone beyond what is reasonable in the sense where this craving is now controlling you from even having decent fellowship.
So where do you then draw the line between that and discipline, let's say?
Yeah, I think gluttony, let's further define it. So all these definitions can hopefully give us a better understanding.
Yeah.
Idolatry means something else has become your God. So what has become your God? In a broad sense, yes, we can now say, with all the definitions that we've talked about, we can now say food is God. Food is God for you. So people think if we said food is God as a definition before our explanation, people can just think of it as overeating or overindulging.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah.
So we mean more than just overindulging when we say food is God. So instead of God being God, now food is your God. And so that is the sin of gluttony.
So it almost seems like, it definitely seems like, then everyone at one point or another, no matter how skinny, overweight, how much you eat, everyone at one point or another has been and is a glutton.
Yeah, and even in that broad definition that we've talked about, an anorexic, a bulimic, those people with disorders are suffering from sin.
Yeah,
it's a sin.
Yeah,
because food is dictating your spiritual well-being.
Yeah,
because you're giving yourself up to what your cravings or appetites or non-cravings, which is still part of cravings, is going to dictate for your life. And so that's why it's such a dangerous thing, where all of a sudden. So it's like you know it when you're in it.
Yeah.
Because you know your heart is bitter. So is turning back food when you ask for $100 steak to be medium rare and you turn it back, is that a sin? No. The act of turning it back is not a sin, but where's your heart? If your heart is full of bitterness as you turn it back, if you are so upset that it's beyond that reasonable sense of biblical peace, right?
Yeah.
You're guilty of sin. You're guilty of the sin of gluttony. And when you are now thinking about this definition, you're thinking, wow, that means so many times we've been guilty of this sin and we didn't even know it. And I'd probably respond by saying, absolutely. It's so deceptive and it's so sneaky that it'll just slide right in with your, orange mocha frappuccino order from Starbucks.
Yeah. It's interesting that the world views gluttony as just a sin of overeating, and maybe that's just the devil hiding the sin of gluttony so that people think, at least I'm not a glutton. At least I don't do this. But in reality, they are suffering from the sin of gluttony and they don't even realize it.
Some people might give the pushback, and which I would like to respond to is, I want to define gluttony simply as overeating. This is too convoluted. I don't like this definition. But the reason why we're defining it this way is because what we were trying to promote here is just just echoing of what you said in the beginning. This is the biblical definition of gluttony. This is the biblical definition of out of control cravings and appetites that are sinful. That's what the Bible continues to talk about. That's why we talk about gluttony in this manner. You can define gluttony whatever way you want, but when we're talking about the sin of gluttony, what we are talking about is an appetite or a craving that leads to sinful ends. That means your stomach is your God or food is God. You're controlled by your stomach rather than you controlling your stomach. That's why we have spiritual disciplines to make sure that it doesn't control us. That's why you exercise, you diet. In the Christian sense, you would fast, right?
Yeah.
I have a question. Is being hangry bad?
Hangry, for those of us that may not be cultured in any sense of the word, is hungry, angry.
Compound word.
No, it's just more of like a word that's put together. It's not. It's like a combo word, where you're hungry, and because you're hungry, you become angry, and you have an attitude towards your spouse, let's say, or your girlfriend, or your friend.
Broad sense, I guess. I mean, why are you angry when you're hungry? Because you're letting your stomach dictate you.
I get hangry. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I notice this about
No, absolutely.
myself.
I think the tendency is there. The sinful disposition is there. But to act out in that sin is sin, right?
Yeah.
So you could be like, oh, I'm very, very I don't know, I'm extra sensitive because I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And for me, it's easy for me to get hangry because when I'm hungry, my body temperature drops and I start shaking.
Oh.
And then you can be placed in a more irritable mood.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes.
So that's hangry. But if I act out in that irritable mood unreasonably, then that would be sin, wouldn't it?
But even being irritable itself is a sin, though, right? Just because you're not acting out in it, you are still sinning.
You can have that tendency, but yeah, I'll probably take one more step before calling it a sin, because you can be irritable. It's a matter of, do I act out on it, or am I going to discipline myself and fight against the sin, right?
Because isn't even being irritable a sin? Because then you have to think about, why am I irritated right now? Is it for justice or righteousness' sake, or is it because I'm hungry?
It could be so if you're saying irritability is a sin, then is aging a sin?
Aging? Like getting older?
Getting old. Because I would say there's a difference between the results of sin and sin itself.
Yeah.
The results of sin is death and aging and things like that. The results of your flesh is you can be irritable, right? But you fight against the flesh.
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily call being irritable a sin. I would call, if you act out on it or if you indulge those thoughts over and over again, that would be a sin. But if you're irritable and you fight against it, then it would be not a sin, because now you're fighting against what would lead you to sin. Hope that makes sense.
The only reason why I bring that up is because I guess all these conversations kind of remind me of this too. But I mean, we talk about side B all the time, right? And this is completely off topic. But that's why I asked that question. It's because
you could have thoughts come into your mind, but who was it that said it's a difference between a thought passing by and letting it nest on your head?
Okay.
Right? So there's a difference. I wouldn't let it necessarily make a home in my head. You would have to fight it. You have
but
to
it's a
shoot
sinful
away.
thought, though.
Yeah, so you shoo it away.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Sinful thoughts can go in your head. You can shoo it away.
Yeah.
But it's different than letting it sit in your head and your mind and playing it over and over.
Gotcha.
And I think with side B, like the other side of the discussion is they're accepting it as like, this is okay for it to remain there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Oh yeah, they definitely do more than let it sit on their head. They let it manifest into action,
and it's beautiful.
It manifests into literal expression and action. Like side B'ers they have their own forums. I think we talked about it. I'm not sure.
We have their own forums
where, you have to show your side B-ness somehow, and they will share it in their forums that they are part of. Like, today I painted my nails. Show your side B-ness or something like that. Okay. So it does manifest into action. And so those things, continuing to let things nest in your head will lead to action and more action and more action. And like I said, all of a sudden, you don't know when like the switch flipped, but you know you're on the other side.
Gotcha. But yeah, I do get hangry. I've noticed. It's a crazy phenomenon, actually. I never thought that I would succumb to this, but I do get hangry. It's kind of crazy. And then something that I thought was so annoying, once I eat a cookie, I'm not annoyed anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's battling the flesh.
Is gluttony a sin that we can actually be victorious over? Because it seems like, I mean, even just commercials and marketing in the world today tells us if you have this, only if you have this will you be satisfied. Only if you have that, you'll be satisfied. And so what it leaves you with a feeling of discontentment, right? Because I don't have this thing, because I don't have that, I am not content. Whereas if I had that thing, I would be. So with the world just marketing gluttony all around us, is it possible to actually be victorious over gluttony?
I mean, yes, obviously.
So
Podcast.
that was the. But I guess how do we do that then? What are some practical ways that we can go about our day to not be gluttons?
Yeah, let's go from the broad to the specific. So the broad is all sin is essentially a worship issue. And I think if we understand that, we can say that the sin of gluttony is not worshiping God. Can I say that? Right?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty easy to understand, especially if you've listened to our previous podcasts on these sins like pride and things like that. It's a worship issue. So you're not worshiping God. So the first thing that you need to do is, if you're guilty of the sin of gluttony, you need to redirect your heart toward God. You need to redirect your desires toward God's will. And so those are things where you see that worship is such a foundational issue for Christians, that if you are struggling with sin, we are to repent, to turn away, but to turn away to what? We're to turn away from the sin toward God, toward worshiping God. So once we used to worship idols, but now we want to worship God. So I would say that if you want to fight against gluttony, then worship God. I know it might not seem connected, and I believe it's because you feel this disconnect between worshiping God and eating food is because you do not glorify God in your eating. And you got to return to like 1 Corinthians about talking about food and like food offered up to idols. What does that even mean? Because if you connect it and understand it as a worship issue, then you understand that even eating food is a worship issue. How you eat the food, with whom you eat food, they're all part of worship. It's part of our understanding of who God is and how he directs us in our lives, even to the part of eating.
Gotcha. What about for those of us that may be not content? We aren't content with God. We aren't satisfied with God. And we want to change this, but we just can't. This is not. How do we go about thinking through, praying through, working on that?
Yeah. So if you have a heart issue or sin issue, I think having that deep understanding comes from reading the word and having the word explained to you, and God opening up your understanding. So things like, when James, your favorite book, right? When James talks about like envy, you guys covet and kill because you can't control your desires, your envy. Yeah. And when you come to that deep understanding, it's like, oh, why do I hate so much? Why am I so angry? It's because of the sin of envy, It's because I don't worship God properly. It's when you have that understanding, you're like, whoa, I never want to be like that because of what it's doing with my relationship with man and with God. And so God's worship affects everything, even your relationship with one another. That's why the greatest commandment is to love God, worship him only, and to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And so it's to love the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, right? And then it's to love your neighbor as yourself. So now that you understand that everything's going to be affected with sin. Sin affects everything. It's not like, sin of gluttony only affects my body. Untrue. Yeah. It affects your relationship with God, and it affects your relationship with one another. So how does the sin of gluttony affect your relationships? Well, there's a parable that Jesus told, right? The rich man and Lazarus. What did the rich man do? He had all the food that he wanted. He ate whatever he wanted. He indulged himself whenever he wanted. And guess who didn't? Lazarus. So Lazarus was on the outside just yearning and longing for the crumbs that will fall off of the table of this rich man. And so that is definitely the sin of gluttony. The sin of gluttony affected his relationships with the other person, which would be his direct neighbor, which would have been Lazarus.
Yeah.
Rich man ends up in hell and ends up even blaming God for not giving him enough.
Yeah.
If you read the parable, it becomes evident that the rich man is now resentful of even God for not doing enough to save him. As ridiculous as that sounds. And so when you see the depravity of sin, the effects of sin, even the noetic effects of sin, how it affects your mind and your thinking, that you become hangry, right?
Yeah.
I think hanger is the noetic effects of sin. And so if that's the case, then wouldn't you fight it with all that you have? So number one, the understanding is opened by the Spirit of God as you read the Word of God. And when the understanding is open, it will, give you that determination to fight. And it's the Spirit of God that gives you the strength to fight.
So, of course, it is physical, but more than the physical, the sin of gluttony is a heart issue then.
Absolutely. Like all sin. Sin is a heart issue, and it manifests through the flesh. And so that's why we battle against the flesh, because now the flesh is our former self, which Paul continues to make that contrast, right? And so we must fight against the flesh, meaning the sarx in the Greek, which is the tendency towards sin. Like I'm so used to it. So we see it in the physics of real life, in reality. Like people who are fat tend to stay fat. Since we're talking about food, right? And now we even know scientifically cells have this memory. So if you retain all these fat cells in your body remembers it used to be this fat and it tends to go back. That's why, those flash diets don't work necessarily because your body always tends to go back. So if you really want to stay healthy and skinny and you were once fat, it's a constant struggle. It's a constant fight.
Yeah.
Because your body remembers when it was fat and it tends to go toward, what it remembers.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I think that's a helpful conversation on gluttony, especially because of the way that the world views gluttony and how maybe we've been even taught, don't be a glutton, don't overeat, don't do this, especially during family gatherings like Thanksgiving. But I'm curious, just I guess as a funny note, how do you feel, knowing what we know about gluttony now, how do you feel about eating contests? Is it okay? Bad? Good?
I think it's great. I think it's hilarious. And I forgot his name. I think it's Joey something.
Joey Chestnut.
Joey Chestnut, who wins all those hot dog eating contests. It's fun. I think there's a science to it. And there's a skill involved. And you need to be biologically fit to eat. So it's something that you could appreciate. I think gluttony is completely different. I get that some people might equate eating contests because it's overeating.
Right.
Simply the sin of gluttony. And I get how that connection can be made. But, it's the same thing with overindulging in anything.
Yeah.
Overindulging could be in anything like exercise. I heard that there are people who run because they get the runner's high, but they'll run excessively, meaning they'll spend like 5 hours, 6 hours a day just running because they're addicted to the runner's high that they get.
Yeah.
And so even in a town over from us, there is a woman famous for just constantly running.
Yeah.
And people take note because they always see her on the road running. I would say that's also an overindulging. But the sin of gluttony obviously is directed with food. But it goes down to just what sin is. What is sin? It's a self-indulgence. It's a lifting up of the self. That's what idolatry is. We think we're lifting up, like Zeus or whatever it is, but we're using those idols to meet our own corrupt, evil cravings and appetites, right?
Yeah.
So that's what sin is. It's a self-indulgence. It's an overindulgence of the self.
Gotcha. So then maybe going into the practical realm, how do we fight gluttony? How do we curb our appetites and, as a matter of fact, point our appetites to Christ and not the things of the world?
Yeah, so sin is bondage. It's slavery. You're a slave to sin, right? And so what would be the opposite of that? Freedom in Christ.
Yeah.
And so what does freedom in Christ look like? I believe it's spiritual discipline. And so how are you disciplining your body, your appetite, your cravings, the foods that you eat? Is there a discipline to it to glorify God? And that's freedom. In the end, you want to be free from sin. You want to be free to live for the glory of God. You want to be free to be in the abundance of joy that God has set before us, right? And so if that's the case, then understand that spiritual discipline, or the disciplining of the body, is a wonderful gift that God gives us. And that's what we should practice. You need to practice discipline. And so even in eating, there should be discipline involved. And so one of the things that we do as a church, which I really enjoy, is that we have times where we feast together and we have times where we fast together. Maybe not necessarily the exact same thing we're fasting, although, now that I think about it after doing this podcast, maybe there could be a time where we call for a fast,
Yeah.
No chicken. I don't know, whatever it is.
Chicken? Oh, that's rough. I love chicken.
No chicken breast.
Oh, that's rough.
Sam is the one that suffers the most on this fast. But it could be something like that. And one of the things that we say, and I think we do well by saying it, is we fast from something in order to feast on something. So there needs to be a feasting. And so when do we feast? And it could be seasonal, meaning throughout certain times. So you could fast for a certain time to feast at one point. So one of the great things that we do during the Lenten season is when we get to Easter, we have a luncheon. And that's part of that celebration of now everyone breaking their fasts. So we eat something, we eat good food, right? And so that's a feasting that we do. And so I don't take the feasting that we do on Easter lightly. I think it's a wonderful thing that we do as a church together, and that we invite others to join us in our fellowship. And so the number one thing I think we can talk about when we talk about practicality and how we can exercise the freedom that we have in Christ is discipline. And so this is not how the world sees it. And I think this is something that we ought to continue to speak on and, just share the truth of how discipline leads to freedom. When you don't have discipline, you are enslaved to it, and then you don't have freedom. Meaning, when you have to eat, whenever you're hungry, you're enslaved to your stomach. And so if you don't eat when you want to eat, then you become hangry and you give into the hanger, yada, yada, yada. It becomes this, this snowball effect down. It just gets worse and worse over time. So it doesn't matter if you're skinny. It doesn't matter if you're fat. It doesn't matter if you're medium. The heart is what matters.
Gotcha.
And so that's what we want to fight against. The number two part is, I think, continuing to meditate on communion is a really wonderful thing for believers. So communion has to do with food for a reason. I think food is such an important part of our lives that even when Jesus resurrected, in the scriptures, it shows us that he ate fish with his disciples. So there is still eating in the resurrection. In the resurrected body, we will still eat. But right now, if we don't eat, we will die. So what does that mean in the resurrected body? So even meditating on that, thinking about how God has set the body up to have certain appetites and to be filled with food is a gift from God. So food is a gift. It's when we overindulge or underindulge, when food becomes an idol or cravings become an idol, that becomes sin. It's the same thing with sex, right? Sex is a gift, and it's under the parameters God has given us because that's the freedom that you have. Otherwise, when we don't do it in the parameters God has set, we become a slave to food. We become a slave to sin. And so I think meditating on the communion or the Lord's table, as we call it, is a wonderful thing to continually do, because when we eat and drink of the body and blood of Christ, what we are doing is proclaiming his death until he comes again. And I think we mentioned this before, but the third and final part I would think is to fast. I think we need to regularly fast. And in our fasting, all these things come up. Like we become really thankful for the times we can eat the things that we're fasting from. So let's say you're fasting from, what's a classic one? Red meat.
Yeah.
So some people fast from red meat during Lent. The wonderful thing about that is you become really thankful for red meat. You're like, wow, this is a wonderful gift God has given us. And you become more appreciative of the food that you've fasted from. When we did solids, right? When we fasted from solids and we just drank liquids for a season. Was it 3 years ago then that the three of us did this?
Yep. 3 years ago.
Yeah. We became really thankful when we ate solid foods. And we understand what it means to be appreciative of the gift that God has given us instead of taking it for granted. So fasting also really helps.
I think to that point too, when we fasted from solid food and we did liquid, I think there was a sense of gratitude towards the food that we have, but then there's also a sense of it's just food. There's nothing extra special about it. It's just food. It's just for sustenance. It's just for enjoyment. That's all it really is. And we can't get our ultimate satisfaction from it is something that also that I've learned as well. With that being said, we're gonna go into a quick, very, very quick Q&A.
We need a beat.
What are your thoughts on social welfare programs like reduced price school lunches or food stamps and the like? From the outside, these seem like socialist programs, but they also appear to be good things. I know in previous podcasts, you said that people like single mothers can turn to local churches, but these sort of issues seem to be too big for just local churches to help everyone with. So how should we view these types of programs?
Yeah. So some people think that socialism is just blanket wrong. It's wrong for governments to use it. So like a broad, diverse community with people with different beliefs, it's wrong because socialism forces one set of beliefs on everybody. The way you interact with like goods and like the means of production. And that's terrible. Socialism, communism is the worst thing ever in that sense. But you know how families function? You function where people might see it even as a socialistic kind of economy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you share food with one another. It's like, oh, that's socialism. The people, no, it's not socialism. What we mean by socialism is when we say the government controls the means of production and distribution. That's socialism. That's what we mean. But you can have certain socialistic, understandings or priorities within smaller groups and smaller settings. And so within the family, I think sharing is a wonderful thing, and people call it socialism. They could call it whatever they want. It just doesn't work for a massive government like the United States. In fact, if they did, it would be a terrible, sinful thing. That's when you're in it when you're in it. Like, wow, now we're definitely in some kind of very evil institution when you're in a socialistic economy within the nation. Now that I've said that, as you get broader and broader, there needs to be less government control in the sense where government has a more overarching, like, protective role for society. So that's why we have a U.S. Army or the military to protect the United States from foreign invaders, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. So those are necessary things that we need to have. But when it comes to, let's say, social programs, is it necessary? And it's necessary to the effect where the smaller institutions, meaning the communities, the churches, and the families have failed. So instead of, let's say, I don't know, this young single mother dying of starvation, if the government comes in and gives her food, is that a good thing? Who's going to say no? No one's going to say no to that. I don't know anybody that would say no unless they're such huge ideologues that they'll just say socialism bad, no matter what. So even in, like, your 2-year-old has to work on capitalism. You don't work, you don't eat to your 2-year-old. which doesn't make it. No one lives like that. Is my point. But the reason why we have these certain levels of discernment is because we have to understand for certain situations call for certain regulations and rules and priorities and orders. And the Bible even talks about that. Within the family, there are certain rules and regulations, but there is this general principle that we all follow, which I guess, broadly speaking, could be God's law, right? And when God dictates something for the general public, it's absolutely necessary. Like, do not murder. There's no institution where murder is allowable or good. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, you do not steal. There's no institution where you should be allowed to steal. Period. I don't care if it's within the small family or big government. You cannot steal. And so those are things that we can always stand by. Those general principles that we're given in the Bible. But when it comes to like the smaller aspects of society, the nuances of, how do you feed your family if you're out of a job? Is unemployment good or bad? And things like that. And we can always have that debate and discussion, because what we don't want is government to have absolute control over the means of production. That can only lead to harm, disruption, corruption, disunity, and the eventual just dismantling of society. I don't know how else we can look at it. And so, in smaller societies, perhaps larger social programs can work, because smaller societies have culture that they share. But in a large society like us, do I want the feds out of social programs? Absolutely. If there are no local programs, can the government step in to help? Sure. But I hope that there are a lot of restrictions, caveats, rules, so that government overreach won't take place. Does that help?
Yeah. I'm curious, though, and this is something that I've been discussing with other people as well. But, we know that the local church is to serve. Its mission is not to serve, its town. Its mission is to preach the gospel. But I'm wondering, what kind of role should the local church have in helping their neighbor in the town, and also how big of a priority is that for the church? Because I know even for certain churches, they have a budget allocated for outreach, right? But I'm wondering what that should look like as we look at the church and its role in the world.
Yeah. And so, you know me, I'm not a really big social justice dude.
Yeah.
I think it leads to evil, and it has led to evil. Social justice is not justice. It's not. It doesn't mean anything. It's like our priority should be, for that person down the street. Okay, how? And what social justice has led us to now is this call to upend democracy. That's how far it's gone.
Yeah.
So if you didn't know how one led to another, great, because that's how crazy social justice will go to. So if we have a neighbor in need, do we help them? Absolutely. How you help them depends on your wisdom, discernment level. Do you just give them whatever they want? No, because in the end, it can harm them. So you don't give a heroin addict more heroin just because that's what they think they need, right? And if you give them food, they might not even eat it because they're so hopped up on drugs. So they're going to die of malnutrition, starvation. And if you give them any money, they're going to use it on heroin. So how do you help them? How do you help them? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as a Christian, I don't think that, that call, the commission has ever changed. It's to make disciples of Christ.
Yeah.
And so even to the heroin addict, it's to make them a disciple of Christ. It's to go make disciples of all nations. And so that has to be there. Once they understand the depravity of their sin, where they are, the nature of sin, and they call out to God so that they can repent and ask for forgiveness, the church is always there to help out. I think it would be crazy if the church doesn't help out those that are part of, the elect that God has called, so to speak, right? And so what do we do with the heroin addict in the meantime? we make sure that this person doesn't do any more harm to themselves and others, and that's where government gets involved. And that's why local municipalities exist. I don't think it's to save them. I think that's where we have gotten our misstep. We think our local municipalities and our government is there to save people, to save their souls or whatever.
Yeah.
Social programs are going to save them.
Right.
I don't think they're going to do any such thing. I think what they can do is keep them from harming themselves and others. I think that's the most they can do, and I think that's what they've been commissioned to do by God, whether you read it in 1 Peter or in Romans 13. And so if that's the case, I think we should keep them to that, make sure they continue to do that. And when you go, well, there are so many people that are dying, so many people. So if you believe it's your job to save every poor person or every starving person in the world, then you will be paralyzed and you will not be able to function. I think it's your job to do the things that you have been called to do, that has been directly placed in front of you. That's why there's immense wisdom in when people give like advice. They go, first things first, make your bed. I've heard that from multiple sources. Why is that? Because there's a task in front of you. You have to do the task. People are so worried about other things that they can't even do the task in front of them. That's why we have all these social justice warriors. Our Gen Zers are all, they're all called to change the world in the name of social justice. And this is why they are not only not doing that, but they're making a world a worse place, a less hospitable or habitable place.
Yeah.
Like people like Greta Thunberg doing the things that they do, because they can't even make their own bed. And that's why I would think the first thing that you need to do is take care of your house. Once your house is strong, you have the ability to help others. Now, it is a sin when you have the riches not to help others. I think that is a sin. That's a rich man's sin, right? We talked about rich man and Lazarus just before in this episode. So what does it mean? It means do the tasks that have been set before you. As God, the Word of God and the Spirit of God convicts you. And so there is a conviction that can come and help. The great flood, the storm of Sandy, right? When it is Sandy, right?
Super Sandy. Superstorm Sandy.
Superstorm Sandy, right? When that came, we were given the opportunity to go to Munaki and help, some of these, was it a trailer park? It was a bunch of these trailer park homes that needed renovation, that needed cleaning up. They were all flooded. There was a lot of damage. We were able to help them. Yeah, absolutely. We jumped to those opportunities to help. But those are an outflow of our understanding and our love for Christ and His church, and our desire to see people saved. We represent the church when we do that. And that's why we see societies completely change when they turn Christian. Christians help others because they are the ones being fed by God's word. And because of that, social justice flips it. It flips it where if you don't help others, you can't do anything like the gospel or discipleship. First, help others. And they flip that order. And that ordering flip has led to this kind of corruption within the so-called church, where they're not the church anymore. No longer do they profess Christ as Lord, but anybody can be Christ, not simply Jesus and that kind of thing. Why do we have all this liberation theology or liberal theology, progressive theology taking over, calling themselves a church when we know they're not the church? Is because they flipped that order. And that's something that I would always warn against, tell people to be wary of. So in the end, if you go, it's a simple question, Puge. The question was, do I help the homeless man? My answer is yes. But how you help them, that's a different question.
One of the pushbacks that I've heard to churches is that churches don't do enough. And I'm wondering, and I want to read a passage for us in the book of James, which is actually my second favorite book of the Bible, versus Hebrews. But I'm wondering if helping the orphan and helping the widow in their affliction. Well, let me just read the verse. This is James chapter 1, verse 26 to 27. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. And so here we see that visiting the orphan and the widow in their affliction is important. But I'm wondering, and I think people might have this confused, when people say that the church is not doing enough, I think perhaps they're confusing the church gathered versus the church scattered. And what I mean by that is the church gathers to hear God's word and to worship together, right? That's what the church gathered does. However, what the church scattered does is a part of what the church does, but it's also different, right? And so are these different things like reaching out to our community, visiting the orphan and the widow? Is that a job for the church scattered, and people are kind of confusing it with the job of the church gathered, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm going to give a little pushback to the question, if that's okay. Every social program that we have now has Christian roots. Every single one, even hospitals, orphanages, they all have Christian roots. To say the church isn't doing enough doesn't make any sense, because you have these institutions because of the church.
Yeah.
The world didn't think like that. The world didn't think that every human life had value.
Yeah.
And the world still doesn't think that. Look at abortion. There is obviously one life that is more valuable than the other.
Yeah.
And that is the whim of the mother. If they want to kill this baby, they should be able to. That's how the world thinks. And that's how the world has always thought. It's Christians who said, actually, every life has value, the mother and the child. We need to protect them both. And especially the child, because they are in such a vulnerable state. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we have pro-lifers come into play and things like that. But the church has always been at the forefront of this understanding that human life has value.
Yeah.
Equal value. So the rich man and the poor man, there's no distinction. Who teaches that? The Bible teaches that. The world doesn't teach that.
Yeah.
And that's why even the world now, as it fights against the church, all they want to do is amass for themselves power. They just want power. When we talk about like equality between the sexes or the genders, the 50 million of them there are now, they're not talking about like everyone like being equal in every single field. They're talking about money. They're talking about power. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And so, like you don't see like women complain that they can't be bricklayers, even though it is 99% men. You don't see that, right?
Right.
What do they complain about? Positions of power, positions where it leads to a lot of money. That's what we see these social warriors, social justice warriors complain and fight about. It's not Christian. It's fighting against the church. That's my pushback against the question. So when we say churches aren't doing enough, what do you mean by that? Meaning the churches should do as much as you want them to do?
Right.
So the world wants the churches to work in these social program and welfare programs. And because the church doesn't do it the way you want to, the church isn't doing enough? What does that mean? The church should get every poor person off the streets? Is that what you mean? Because you've also failed in doing that.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's an impossibility. The poor will always be with us. Who said that? Jesus said that, because it's a fact of life. It's the noetic effects of sin. People will be poor. People will be, people will be disconnected from the community because they just can't connect with community in a way that will be beneficial to them, because that's the effect of sin. And so how do you defeat sin? You defeat sin by preaching the gospel, by God coming in and defeating sin. Believing in the resurrection and the power of Jesus Christ. That's how sin is defeated.
Yeah.
It's not through these social welfare programs. And I wish people would get that. And I get that the church can get criticism. Perhaps the church can do more. But if you are thinking that I will join you in this criticism of the overall church, I will not. And in fact, if you really want to do that, then I would say go from the very beginning, look at it in context. Any social program that you have, even AA, is a Christian foundation. It's a Christian source. The reason why we have Alcoholics Anonymous is because Christians started this program to help alcoholics defeat this addiction. Okay?
So I guess then my question would be, the second part is, do you think that confusion comes from people not understanding that the church gathered, their job is to worship God Whereas the church scattered is to be in their neighborhoods, be in their homes, and to be a light and to be a salt to the world, because they are both the church. One is gathered, the other is scattered, but they're both the church. And I know that I'm making huge distinctions here, but there has to be a significance to the church gathering. The purpose is to worship, right?
Yeah, I think when we worship God, everything changes, and it affects even those that are outside of the church, because there is that grace that flows out from a person that is filled with grace. You just become gracious. It's just a natural part of life. Now, what I find interesting is that this disconnect between, you want the churches to do a lot. So the government and all these secularists want the church, these atheists, they will criticize the church for not doing enough. At the same time, they are the ones that are putting more and more restrictions on churches, that want to see the churches fail, make fun of the churches, that want to limit the church's reach.
Yeah.
You know, even with like adoption, forget like almost every adoption agency is Christian. But now it's the government that wants to reach in and say, you can't discriminate from parents,
right?
Blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, you see these adoption agencies kind of cave in and placate to those government demands because they don't want to get sued. They don't want their government funding to stop, whatever the case is. So I find that kind of interesting that you want the churches to do more. At the same time, you want to crush churches. That doesn't make any sense to me. If you want the churches to do more, let them thrive. Stop handcuffing them. Stop restricting them. Stop suing these bakers that are Christian who won't bake your gay wedding cake or your LGBTQ transition cake. Stop suing them and let them prosper, or at least don't keep them from what they would have naturally prospered with, right? And so, yeah, I have a lot to say about the question itself. It doesn't make any sense. And I hope that Christians don't succumb to this kind of thinking. So there are some people that are Christians who would even think, yeah, the church doesn't do enough. We need to do more, blah, blah, blah. Don't succumb to those kind of thought processes, because it's just flatly false. It's untrue.
I mean, I want to also bring this up because people may be wondering, well, what is our church doing? You know, now how is our church being a salt and a light? How are we helping those who are around us? How have we changed Teaneck, right? How have we served Teaneck, the town that we are in New Jersey? And so how would you respond to that?
In a lot of ways, I suppose. There is the global aspect of our missions, and then there is a local aspect. And so are we Teaneck residents? No.
Yeah.
So what is our community made up of? I would say that's first and foremost. So what is our demographic? What is CGS's demographic? Are we reaching out to that demographic?
Uh-huh.
Are we proselytizing? Are we evangelizing? Are we sharing the good news with the demographic that we are? So local church is called local church because it's placed in a specific place.
Yeah.
I get it. But it's also a demographic, meaning we have a certain group of people that attend our church. What are they? And are we evangelizing to them? One thing that we don't have are Teaneck residents.
Yeah, actually, though.
We do some work in Teaneck, but it would be false to say that, you know, we should do all of our work in Teaneck because that's not our demographic. So we do some work in the Teaneck area.
We have one family who's from Teaneck.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever it
is.
It's
his birthday last week. Anyway.
Yeah, and then so what do we do our work with and things like that? And so we do children's programs, youth programs.
Yeah.
We help families, we invite families to come over. We don't really have like 60, 70-year-olds. So maybe if we have more 60, 70-year-olds, we could have even like, I don't know, elderly programs, because I was part of a few when I lived back in Queens because it was necessary. A lot of elderly people live in, let's say, Flushing, and they need like spaces for them to congregate, to actually have social interactions. It's absolutely necessary for elderly people, especially now post-COVID, you know? And so there are things like that I keep in mind. And so what do we do? I would even think that this podcast is a social outreach program, so to speak, in some ways, because we reach non-CGS members, although its first purpose is to reach CGS. That makes sense? So to say that we do nothing, you'd have to qualify it.
Yeah.
What do we not do? Food programs? Is that the only way you think of as social outreach? Because even if that's the case, we do food programs. We have done it in the past with local like food, like canned food, like drives, yeah,
coat
things
drives,
like that.
glove
Coat
drives.
We do all of those things. What are we supposed to do? 90% of our effort needs to go in there. Is that
right.
Who decides that? You? I mean, so that's the pushback I have, because the question itself, I think, is disingenuous. I think it's dishonest. I think it's there just to criticize the church, to prop up the self. And so I don't agree necessarily with that line of questioning, because I don't want to give in or placate to that ideology.
Do you think a part of it, and what you said was really interesting just now, and I'm sorry, this quick question is turning into a medium question, medium quick. Do you think people may accuse the church of not doing as much, the church gathered as not doing as much, because people now travel to different towns to go to their churches? So for example, back in the day, the town would have a church, right? That's why we have like First Presbyterian, Second Presbyterian, First Baptist. You would have a church in that town. The townspeople would go to that church. They would worship God together on the Sabbath, and then they would go home and they would be the salt and the light in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their streets, or whatever it may be. And so that is different compared to today, where people now drive up to an hour to go to church.
I think this is a different question. Yeah, this is a different question that you're asking. And I think it's complicated in the sense where it used to be like that, and I think it's absolutely necessary to have churches and local communities and be part of it.
Yeah.
Because it affects the communities. It sanctifies the community. You have better community if there is a solid church there. And so if you are part of a community and there is a solid local church there, I think attending it is a good thing. Now that I've said that, it gets complicated because there are so many places that call themselves churches, but there aren't really churches. I mean, meaning, do they preach the gospel? Do they believe the Bible is the word of God? Meaning,
right.
Inerrancy and infallibility has to be there. Roman Catholics do not believe that. They just don't. So attending a Roman Catholic Mass is not being part of a local church, even if they have social programs. And Roman Catholic churches have tons of social programs. They have like bingo nights even.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is beneficial in the sense where we're called to be part of a fellowship of the saints, a gathering. And so if you have to travel 20 minutes to go to a Bible-believing, a gospel-preaching church, absolutely do that. If there's nothing around you, meaning you have to drive over an hour, the answer is move. That's it.
Yeah.
You have to be part of one. So that's your number one priority. Your number one priority isn't to join some kind of local institution so that you can be part of a social program. That's not your number one priority. Your number one priority is to join a local church or relatively local church that is a true church. That's your number one priority. And because it's a true church, from it will flow, sanctifying goodness, grace.
Thank you for that. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we have a discussion on wrath. Is playing Call of Duty and Counter-Strike okay? Is wrath, what does it mean by wrath? Are we not supposed to watch MMA or boxing? Should we not box?
And also, there's a great movie called The Wrath of Man.
Oh, I've never seen that one. I've read a book called Grapes of Wrath. That was
really?
rough. Yeah. Didn't like that one, but
yeah, it's a Guy Ritchie film. If you know Guy Ritchie, is a famous director. No,
I've heard of him though.
I see.
What's that other guy, the short guy?
Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, yeah. I'm sorry.
Completely different style.
But we'll be talking about wrath next week. It's going to be exciting. Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.